My son Nathan gave his mother-in-law a luxury yacht for her 70th birthday, complete with champagne speeches and a gold-trimmed certificate he framed himself. A week later, at my own birthday party, he handed me a glossy gift bag with a travel-size haircare set and a $30 spa coupon. Brianna smiled when I opened it and said loud enough for the whole yard to hear, "With your hair these days, we thought this was perfect." People laughed. I didn't. I stood there holding the plastic bottle, my hands shaking, not from rage but from something deeper. Disbelief, sadness, a kind of quiet break I never saw coming. That night I didn't cry. I wrote, I remembered, I added it all up. 3 days later, their perfect life began to unravel. And 23 missed calls from Brianna flooded my phone. "Please," she whispered in the last message, "just stop." But I couldn't stop. Because this time I wasn't just a mother hoping to be loved. I was a woman who finally remembered her worth. I stood near the edge of the patio holding my glass of lemonade with both hands to keep them from shaking. The string lights above the backyard flickered as the crowd let out a round of delighted gasps. Everyone had gathered to celebrate Victoria's 70th birthday. Brianna's mother, my son Nathan's mother-in-law. And clearly they had pulled out all the stops. Nathan, dressed in a tailored navy suit, held up a printed certificate encased in a gold-trimmed frame. "Happy birthday, Mom," he said, beaming as he presented it to Victoria. "A week-long luxury yacht cruise along the Pacific coast. Just for you." The applause was thunderous. Someone whistled. A few people even rose from their seats to give her a standing ovation. Brianna looked proud, her hand resting lightly on her mother's shoulder, as Victoria wiped away a dramatic tear. "Oh, Nathan," she said, her voice trembling, "you shouldn't have." But of course he should have. Nathan and Brianna had always known how to impress the room. Their life together was one long photo shoot, ribbon cuttings, exclusive dinners, charity galas. Everything about them was curated, filtered, performed. I smiled politely and clapped, but my cheeks were warm and not from the spring heat. I'd chosen a simple pale blue dress for the evening, one I'd had for years but still liked. I'd brought a bouquet of hydrangeas from my garden, carefully arranged in brown paper with a satin bow. No one noticed them. The table was already overflowing with wine baskets, high-end perfume, and designer handbags. My flowers sat awkwardly at the end like they didn't belong. As the crowd settled and waiters moved around with trays of sparkling cider and miniature crab cakes, I drifted toward a shaded corner. From there, I could observe without being seen. Nathan hadn't looked in my direction all evening. Neither had Brianna. I tried not to take it personally. It had been like this for a while now. Me quietly placed at the edges of their lives. Linda, my neighbor and oldest friend, found me by the hydrangeas. "You doing okay?" she asked under her breath, giving me that look. The one she reserved for moments when politeness had gone out the window and truth needed to be named. "I'm fine," I said, forcing a small smile. "Just watching." She raised an eyebrow but didn't push. "They're laying it on thick tonight," she murmured, eyes scanning the crowd. "That yacht must have cost a fortune." I nodded and kept my mouth shut. There were so many things I could have said. About how I'd helped Nathan through college. About how I took on a second job when he and Brianna couldn't afford their first apartment. About the handmade quilt I gave them for their wedding, which I never saw again after that day. But this wasn't the time or place for bitterness. I'd learned long ago that in gatherings like this, silence was often the safer currency. Then came the part of the evening I hadn't expected. As people returned to their seats with fresh drinks, Brianna suddenly tapped her champagne glass with a fork. The chatter dimmed. And now she said with that syrupy smile of hers, "We want to take a moment to celebrate someone else very special tonight." My heart skipped. For a brief second I wondered, hoped, that she meant me. Maybe, just maybe, they hadn't forgotten. My birthday was next week. Maybe they were doing something early. Nathan joined her at the center of the patio, holding a small pink gift bag with a glittery bow on top. My name was written on the tag in Brianna's looping cursive. He walked it over and handed it to me with a casual, almost dismissive grin. Just a little something for you, Mom." Everyone watched. I stood unsure of what to do. I didn't want to make a scene, but I could feel the weight of all their eyes on me. I opened the bag. Inside was a neatly folded spa voucher for a $30 foot massage at a strip mall salon I'd never heard of, and a lavender-scented bath bomb, the kind you find in the clearance bin at the drugstore. "For you," Brianna said brightly, "because you're always saying your feet get sore, right?" A few people laughed, too loudly. Nathan chuckled along. But I didn't. I stood there holding the bag, my smile frozen. I glanced at Victoria, who was still clutching the yacht certificate to her chest like it was a Nobel Prize. The difference was so stark it bordered on cruel. Linda gave me a look of pure fury from across the lawn, but I stayed still. I wasn't going to give them the satisfaction of breaking. "Well," I said softly, "thank you." That was thoughtful. My voice didn't crack, but I felt the tremble deep in my ribs. I sat down slowly, placing the bag at my feet like it might burn me. For the rest of the evening, I listened to stories about luxury vacations, new investments, and exclusive resorts. No one asked me about my garden or how my book club was going. I could have vanished into thin air and most wouldn't have noticed. At one point, I excused myself and walked to the edge of the property where a line of hedges separated the yard from the neighboring field. I stared out at the fading pink horizon, the sound of laughter behind me growing fainter. Why had that hurt so much? It wasn't the money. It was the message. It said, "You are no longer the center. You are no longer worthy. You are background." When I returned to the table, Linda stood and handed me a glass of wine. "They're not going to get away with this," she whispered. I shook my head. "It's fine." "No," she said, "it's not. And you know it." The rest of the night blurred. Eventually, guests began to leave, hugging Victoria and praising the party. Nathan and Brianna slipped out early, saying they had a brunch thing in the morning. I didn't even get a hug goodbye. When I finally made it home, I placed the gift bag on the kitchen counter and sat in the quiet. $30, that's what I was worth to them. I looked at the photo on my mantel. Me holding Nathan when he was 6, his arms wrapped tightly around my neck. I remembered the time he scraped his knee and asked only for me. The nights I stayed up sewing Halloween costumes. The graduation I clapped the loudest at. I remembered the sacrifices I made that no one else ever saw. And slowly, something inside me hardened. This wasn't just about a gift. It was about being erased. And I wasn't going to let that happen quietly. The morning after Victoria's birthday party, I stood at my kitchen sink rinsing out the glass I'd barely sipped from the night before. The spa coupon still sat on the counter where I had left it unopened, untouched. I could have tossed it in the trash. Maybe I should have. But instead I left it there like a bruise I kept poking just to remind myself it had happened. Outside, the sky was pale, washed with the soft light of early spring. My backyard was quiet, except for a few cardinals hopping near the bird feeder. The lawn was beginning to green again after a long winter. A breeze carried the scent of lilac from the hedge near the fence, and for a moment I let myself breathe it in. Steady, familiar, unlike everything else. I found myself opening the old cedar chest in my bedroom, the one I hadn't touched in years. Inside were little things I used to keep. Drawings, letters, school crafts, trophies of motherhood. On top, a folded piece of construction paper caught my eye. I unfolded it carefully, a crayon drawing of 2 stick figures, one labeled "Me with spiky brown hair," and the other taller with a crown and the words, "My Mom, the Queen of the World." In the bottom corner, Nathan had written in crooked letters, "I love you more than pancakes." I sat there for a long time holding that piece of paper. The boy who made this, who once refused to go to bed unless I tucked him in with the frog blanket. Where had he gone? Somewhere along the way, life had shifted. First jobs, then Brianna. Then everything got sleek and sharp like the edge of their cutlery. Cold, efficient metallic. Still, I couldn't stop myself from hoping. My 70th birthday was coming up next week. I hadn't planned to do anything at first. But after the party, after that moment of public humiliation, I tried not to relive every hour. I felt a quiet resolve forming. Maybe this was my chance to reclaim something. Not attention, not gifts, but dignity. A gathering not to be impressed by, but to belong to. So I pulled out my notepad and started planning. A backyard party. Simple. A few folding tables, string lights from the shed, and comfort food. My kind of celebration. I called Maria at the local cafe and asked if she could cater a tray of her lemon bars and chicken salad sandwiches. For you. Anything, she said. 70, huh? You don't look a day over 50. I laughed genuinely for the first time in days. Thanks, Maria. I'll take that and run with it. Next, I texted my neighbors, Ellen and Pete, Linda, and the folks from my book club. Everyone responded warmly, most with little exclamation marks and smiley faces. It felt good to see enthusiasm in their replies. Finally, I sent a message to Nathan. Hi, honey. I'm hosting a small birthday party next Saturday in the backyard. I'd love for you and Brianna to come. Nothing fancy. Just some food, music, and friends. Hope you can make it. I stared at the message for a moment, rereading it before hitting send. It felt neutral kind, unassuming, the way I always tried to be with him. Not too needy, not too emotional. Just enough, he replied the next day. Busy week. We'll try to make it. That was it. No sounds great. No looking forward to it. No heart, no smiley, no punctuation. Just 7 words. I stared at the screen for a long time, thumb hovering, wondering if I should write back. I didn't. The day before the party, I hung paper lanterns between the maple trees in the yard. Linda came over to help with the folding chairs and tablecloths. You need to let me host this at my place, she said for the 3rd time. Your house is too sweet for this nonsense. It's not nonsense, I replied. It's just home. And it was. Every corner of that yard held memories. Nathan's 3rd birthday party where he ran around with frosting on his cheeks. The time he tried to build a lemonade stand, but knocked over all the cups. The years of 4th of July potlucks, fireflies, and laughter. I wanted to fill this place with warmth again, even if only for one afternoon. Inside, I polished the family photo frames on the hallway wall. One caught me off guard. Our Christmas photo from 12 years ago. Nathan, with braces, wearing a lumpy green sweater I had knitted Brianna beside him, still fresh-faced and laughing. I remembered how nervous I had been that day, wanting to make a good impression, wanting her to like me, wanting to be needed. It's funny how we bend ourselves backwards in silence, thinking it will be seen as love. But silence, I was learning, doesn't always speak. Later that night, I stood on the porch sipping chamomile tea while the backyard glowed softly behind me. The string lights fluttered in the breeze, casting gentle orbs of light on the tables below. My hands were sore from setting up, but my heart felt quietly ready. There was no promise Nathan would show up. I knew that, but I still hoped. Hope, I've come to learn, is both the softest and strongest part of a mother's heart. When I went inside, I placed the spa coupon in a drawer. Not out of sight, but out of reach. I wasn't going to let it define what this weekend meant to me. I sat down at the dining table and scribbled names onto place cards. Simple cardstock folded in half, nothing fancy. Linda Maria Carl from my book club, Little Emma who loved my peach cobbler, and one for Nathan and Brianna in matching cursive. A flicker of doubt crossed my chest, but I pushed it aside. Maybe they wouldn't come, but maybe they would. And if they did, I wanted to meet them with grace. Not the kind that bows or breaks, but the kind that knows its own worth. That night, as I turned out the lights and climbed into bed, I whispered one thing to myself. You are still that queen in the crayon crown, even if he's forgotten, even if he doesn't come. You are still her. And that mattered. The morning after Victoria's birthday party, I stood at my kitchen sink rinsing out the glass I'd barely sipped from the night before. The spa coupon still sat on the counter where I had left it unopened, untouched. I could have tossed it in the trash. Maybe I should have. But instead I left it there like a bruise I kept poking, just to remind myself it had happened. Outside, the sky was pale, washed with the soft light of early spring. My backyard was quiet except for a few cardinals hopping near the bird feeder. The lawn was beginning to green again after a long winter. A breeze carried the scent of lilac from the hedge near the fence, and for a moment I let myself breathe it in. Steady. Familiar. Unlike everything else. I found myself opening the old cedar chest in my bedroom, the one I hadn't touched in years. Inside were little things I used to keep. Drawings, letters, school crafts, trophies of motherhood. On top, a folded piece of construction paper caught my eye. I unfolded it carefully. A crayon drawing of two stick figures, one labeled me with spiky brown hair, and the other taller with a crown, and the words, "My Mom, the Queen of the World." In the bottom corner, Nathan had written in crooked letters, "I love you more than pancakes." I sat there for a long time holding that piece of paper. The boy who made this, who once refused to go to bed unless I tucked him in with the frog blanket. Where had he gone? Somewhere along the way, life had shifted. First jobs, then Brianna, then everything got sleek and sharp like the edge of their cutlery, cold, efficient metallic. Still, I couldn't stop myself from hoping. My 70th birthday was coming up next week. I hadn't planned to do anything at first, but after the party, after that moment of public humiliation, I tried not to relive every hour I felt a quiet resolve forming. Maybe this was my chance to reclaim something. Not attention, not gifts, but dignity, a gathering not to be impressed by but to belong to. So I pulled out my notepad and started planning. A backyard party. Simple. A few folding tables, string lights from the shed, and comfort food. My kind of celebration. I called Maria at the local cafe and asked if she could cater a tray of her lemon bars and chicken salad sandwiches. "For you." "Anything," she said. 70, huh? You don't look a day over 50. I laughed genuinely for the first time in days. "Thanks, Maria. I'll take that and run with it." Next, I texted my neighbors. Ellen and Pete, Linda, and the folks from my book club. Everyone responded warmly, most with little exclamation marks and smiley faces. It felt good to see enthusiasm in their replies. Finally, I sent a message to Nathan. "Hi, honey. I'm hosting a small birthday party next Saturday in the backyard. I'd love for you and Brianna to come. Nothing fancy, just some food, music, and friends. Hope you can make it." I stared at the message for a moment, rereading it before hitting send. It felt neutral kind, unassuming, the way I always tried to be with him. Not too needy, not too emotional. Just enough. He replied the next day. "Busy week. We'll try to make it." That was it. No sounds great. No looking forward to it. No heart, no smiley, no punctuation. Just 7 words. I stared at the screen for a long time, thumb hovering, wondering if I should write back. I didn't. The day before the party, I hung paper lanterns between the maple trees in the yard. Linda came over to help with the folding chairs and tablecloths. "You need to let me host this at my place," she said for the 3rd time. "Your house is too sweet for this nonsense." "It's not nonsense," I replied. "It's just home." And it was. Every corner of that yard held memories. Nathan's 3rd birthday party where he ran around with frosting on his cheeks. The time he tried to build a lemonade stand but knocked over all the cups. The years of 4th of July potlucks, fireflies, and laughter. I wanted to fill this place with warmth again, even if only for one afternoon. Inside, I polished the family photo frames on the hallway wall. One caught me off guard. Our Christmas photo from 12 years ago. Nathan, with braces, wearing a lumpy green sweater I had knitted Brianna beside him, still fresh-faced and laughing. I remembered how nervous I had been that day, wanting to make a good impression, wanting her to like me, wanting to be needed. It's funny how we bend ourselves backwards in silence, thinking it will be seen as love. But silence, I was learning, doesn't always speak. Later that night, I stood on the porch sipping chamomile tea while the backyard glowed softly behind me. The string lights fluttered in the breeze, casting gentle orbs of light on the tables below. My hands were sore from setting up, but my heart felt quietly ready. There was no promise Nathan would show up. I knew that. But I still hoped. Hope, I've come to learn, is both the softest and strongest part of a mother's heart. When I went inside, I placed the spa coupon in a drawer. Not out of sight, but out of reach. I wasn't going to let it define what this weekend meant to me. I sat down at the dining table and scribbled names onto place cards. Simple cardstock folded in half, nothing fancy. Linda Maria Carl from my book club, little Emma, who loved my peach cobbler, and one for Nathan and Brianna in matching cursive. A flicker of doubt crossed my chest, but I pushed it aside. Maybe they wouldn't come. But maybe they would. And if they did, I wanted to meet them with grace. Not the kind that bows or breaks, but the kind that knows its own worth. That night, as I turned out the lights and climbed into bed, I whispered one thing to myself. You are still that queen in the crayon crown. Even if he's forgotten, even if he doesn't come, you are still her. And that mattered. The yard was quiet after they left. A few conversations tried to resume. Hesitant laughs, clinking glasses. But the air had changed. It wasn't just the shock of what had happened, but the recognition of something that had been festering beneath the surface for a long time. Nathan and Brianna didn't say goodbye. They didn't apologize. They just walked out their steps sharp across the flagstone path, the car door slamming, echoing louder than anything said all evening. I stood there for a few more minutes after they were gone, pretending to adjust a serving tray, mostly to keep my hands busy. Guests began to come up to say their goodbyes, some with hugs, others with quiet pats on the shoulder. A few offered soft-spoken words of support. That was brave, one neighbor said. You didn't deserve that, another murmured. I nodded and smiled where I could, but I felt like I was watching everything through thick glass. Their faces blurred. Their voices sounded like they were underwater. When the last of the folding chairs had been stacked and the dessert table emptied, the sun had already dipped below the horizon. The string lights above me cast a pale glow over the now empty yard, fluttering gently in the breeze, like echoes of laughter that had long faded. I stayed behind to clean up. It was easier than going inside, easier than being alone with the echo of Brianna's voice and Nathan's indifference. I moved slowly, scraping plates, gathering napkins, rinsing the plastic serving bowls in the kitchen sink. Linda came back after walking Pete to their car. She stepped into the backyard without a word and picked up a plate. You don't have to do this, I said. I know, she replied, but I'm going to. We worked in silence for a few minutes, the kind of silence that only exists between old friends. Comfortable, honest, full. When we'd tossed the last trash bag into the bin, she turned to me and placed a hand on my shoulder. Her grip was firm, steady. You didn't deserve any of that, she said, her voice low. They crossed a line tonight. I tried to respond, but my throat caught. Instead, I just nodded. She pulled me into a hug, her chin resting on my shoulder the way it had back when we were young moms walking our babies around the block in strollers. Let it out if you need to, she whispered. You don't have to keep it all in. I didn't. Not yet, but the pressure behind my ribs was building. After she left, I stood in the doorway of my kitchen for a while, staring at the half-melted birthday candle on the counter. I couldn't remember what wish I'd made before blowing it out, or if I had made one at all. Eventually, I poured myself a glass of wine. The good kind. The bottle I'd been saving for something special. I carried it into the living room and sat down in my armchair, the one with the cushion worn smooth in the center from years of use. My legs ached. My back throbbed. But mostly it was my heart that hurt. I took a sip, then another. The house was quiet, save for the occasional creak of wood settling in the night. I turned toward the bookshelf in the corner and pulled out an old photo album. The leather cover was cracked and the spine barely held together. I hadn't looked through it in years. The first page held a photo of Nathan at 4 wearing a superhero cape made from an old bath towel. His eyes sparkled with that unfiltered joy only children seem to possess. I remembered how he used to leap from the couch yelling, "I'll save you, Mom," before collapsing into giggles. I flipped through page after page, watching my son grow up all over again. Halloween costumes, baseball games, the first day of middle school, his high school graduation, and then there was college. Pictures of the campus, the moving truck the day I drove him across the state in my old Corolla packed to the brim with betting books and nerves. I remembered how he had called me his safe place when he couldn't sleep his first month away. I remembered the part-time job I picked up to help with tuition when his scholarship only covered part of it. I remembered the wedding, how I had taken out a personal loan to pay for the flowers Brianna insisted were non-negotiable, how I sewed the lace on her veil myself when she complained about the price of the custom one, how I gave them the down payment for their first home, money I had been saving to fix my roof. I never once asked to be repaid, never once asked for gratitude. But now I wished I had asked for respect. I closed the album gently and leaned back, my eyes stinging. It wasn't just what they did tonight. It was the years of small dismissals, the forgotten birthdays, the phone calls that never came. The way I was only invited to events when it was convenient. The way Brianna looked at me like I was some relic they hadn't gotten around to discarding yet. I reached for the wine again and took a longer sip this time. The clock ticked on the mantel. Midnight passed. I stayed in the chair, unmoving the photo album still on my lap. At some point, I whispered aloud, "No more." It wasn't said with anger. It wasn't said to be heard. It was a vow. No more quietly accepting crumbs. No more being the backdrop to someone else's curated life. I stood and walked into my bedroom, opening the small lockbox where I kept important papers, tax returns, legal documents, receipts I wasn't sure I still needed. I stared at the stack of envelopes and folders thinking. Then I pulled open the drawer beneath and retrieved a worn notebook, the one I hadn't touched since Nathan's wedding. I opened it to a blank page, picked up a pen, and began to write. I wrote down every dollar I had contributed to Nathan and Brianna's life, every instance, every loan, every gift, not out of resentment, but clarity. I needed to see it, all of it, in black and white. By the time I finished, it was nearly 2 a.m. I took a deep breath and let my hand fall away from the page. I wasn't sure what I would do next. But I knew one thing for certain: I wasn't going to let this hurt fester in silence anymore. I wasn't going to let them rewrite me as the bitter, dramatic mother who couldn't take a joke. Because I wasn't bitter. I was heartbroken, and I was done letting them break me quietly. From now on, I would not be silent. But I would be smart, steady, unshakable, the kind of woman I used to be before I gave away every piece of myself in the name of love. And just like that, a new part of me stirred awake, not loud, not angry, but alive. The notebook sat open on my kitchen table for 2 full days before I did anything with it. Every line was filled with dollar amounts, dates, notes in the margin, reminders of all I'd poured into my son's life. At first, I kept revisiting it just to convince myself I wasn't imagining things, that I hadn't dreamed up all those sacrifices. But as I read each entry over again, it stopped being about needing proof and started becoming something else entirely. It became resolve. I wasn't sure what to do with that resolve at first. I wasn't someone who stirred the pot. My entire life I'd taken pride in being the kind of woman who handled things quietly, who didn't cause a fuss, who bore disappointment with grace. But there comes a point when even grace needs boundaries. That point had come and gone. I had stayed silent for too long. So I made a call. It was a number I hadn't dialed in years. My hands shook slightly as I held the phone to my ear, unsure if it would still work. But on the 3rd ring, I heard the familiar voice. "Hello, Thomas? It's Eleanor." A pause. Then warm surprise. "Eleanor, Montgomery. I'll be..." It's been, what, 10 years, maybe more. At least I said, and for the first time in days, I felt something close to relief. Thomas had been a CPA for decades, sharp as a tack, even back when we first met during PTA board meetings. He'd done my taxes for years before he retired. Trustworthy, discreet, the kind of man who knew how to spot a lie in a ledger from 50 feet away. "I need your help," I said. His tone changed immediately. "You all right?" "I'm not hurt," I said, "but something isn't sitting right with me. I think Nathan and Brianna did something unethical." He listened carefully as I laid out the story. Victoria's party, the yacht, the luxury label of it all. I didn't even have to say the words outright. He understood what I meant. "You're thinking they didn't pay for that yacht themselves." "I know they didn't," I said quietly. "They've never had that kind of money. But Brianna's parents do." There was silence for a beat, then a low hum. "Do you know where Charles banks?" I gave him the name of the private investment firm I remembered Brianna mentioning once. Thomas sighed. "That helps. I still know someone there. Let me make a call." I thanked him, we hung up, and I went about my afternoon pretending to be normal. Folding laundry, reorganizing the pantry, anything to keep from obsessively checking my phone. He called back the next day. "They did it," he said without preamble. "They moved nearly 6 figures from one of Charles's accounts, his personal trust fund no less, into a company account. On paper, the company looks like it belongs to Charles too, but the signature authorizing the transfer doesn't match his. And the company was incorporated 3 weeks before the yacht was purchased." My stomach dropped. "They forged his name." "That's what it looks like," Thomas confirmed. I compared his real signature on file. "This one's close but off. Probably Nathan's doing. Brianna never did have a steady hand." I pressed the phone harder against my ear as if it could bring me closer to what I needed to hear. "Can you send me what you have?" I asked. "Of course. But, Eleanor, are you planning to go to the authorities?" I was quiet for a long time. Then I said no, not yet, because I had something else in mind, something that would speak louder than a police report. Thomas emailed me a folder that afternoon. Bank statements, transfer records, shell company filings. I printed them out on my old inkjet, the pages curling slightly from the heat. I sat with them in my lap for a long time, flipping through them like chapters of a book I never wanted to read. The evidence was clear. My son and his wife had stolen from her own father, lied, faked, all to play the role of perfect children at a party, all to show the world that they were successful and generous, and yet they gave me drugstore bath products with a smile. I went to the post office the next morning. I stood in line behind a woman sending graduation invitations and a man mailing a birthday card. My envelope was thick, but I made sure it was neatly sealed with no return address. My mom and bam bam sam bam. I didn't want credit. I didn't want drama. I just wanted the truth to land in the right hands. To Mr. Charles Langston. Personal. That was all. I walked out into the parking lot and stood there for a moment watching traffic crawl past the edge of town. There was something deeply humbling about sending a message into the world and having no idea what would come back. But I didn't doubt the choice. Not for a second. The first call from Brianna came 3 days later, then the second, then the third. By lunchtime, the number had climbed to 11. By bedtime, 23. I didn't answer a single one. I let each ring buzz through the kitchen, the living room, even while I was watering the petunias out back. I let them pile up like unanswered questions because I had nothing left to explain. The voicemails were all over the place. "Eleanor, please, we need to talk. I don't know what you think you're doing. You're making a huge mistake. Can you please just stop?" By the end of the day, her voice had changed. Gone was the chirpy, performative tone. What remained was something shaky, desperate, almost human, but I wasn't ready to hear it. Nathan didn't call. That somehow hurt more. Not because I needed his apology, but because his silence told me everything. He knew what they'd done. He knew I'd found out, and he didn't even try to explain. That night I went to Linda's house for tea. She'd made shortbread cookies and set out 2 mismatched mugs like we used to do when our kids were little, and we met to decompress after field trips. She listened quietly as I told her everything. About Thomas, the documents, the shell company, the forged signature. When I was done, she sat back, eyes wide. "Well," she said, finally, "that's one hell of a birthday gift." I laughed dry and short. Too bad it wasn't wrapped. She poured more tea. "You did the right thing." "I know," I said. "But does it feel like enough?" I looked at her, really looked at her, and whispered, "It doesn't feel like anything yet. Because the truth is, even after all that, even with justice on the horizon, I was still grieving. Not for my reputation, not for the money. For my son. For the boy who once held my hand so tightly in parking lots. For the boy who used to leave me sticky notes in my lunchbox that said, 'I love you' in crooked letters. For the man I hoped he'd grow into. But not for the man he had become. That man I no longer recognized." I finished my tea and walked home under a sky full of stars. The air was cool, and for the first time in weeks, the ache in my chest didn't weigh me down. I had sent the truth into the world. Now it was up to the world to do what it would with it. And as for me, I wasn't done. Not by a long shot. It started quietly, as these things often do. Just before sunrise one morning, I padded into the kitchen with my robe still tied tight and the kettle steaming on the stove. I opened my phone like I did every day, just to check the weather, maybe the news. And there it was, a single red notification on the app I rarely used anymore. Facebook. I tapped more from habit than curiosity. The post was from Brianna, public, her profile photo. One of those carefully staged headshots. Smiling perfect. Her words anything but. Some people ruin their own birthday parties and then blame everyone else. Not everything is about you, Eleanor. There were 37 likes, a handful of comments, a few laughing emojis, and one friend of hers chiming in, "Ugh, mother-in-laws," always playing victim. I stood frozen in my kitchen phone in one hand, the whistle of the kettle building in the background like a storm in my ears. I didn't comment. I didn't share it. I didn't even screenshot it. Instead, I turned off the stove, poured the hot water into my cup, and sat down at the kitchen table. I stared out the window as the morning sun poured over the fence. There was a part of me that expected this. Brianna wasn't the type to sit quietly when control slipped from her hands. She needed to steer the narrative, needed to make sure the world saw her as the aggrieved, not the aggressor. What I hadn't expected, what I hadn't prepared for, was how quickly some people chose sides. Later that day, I got a call from Ruth, a woman I'd known for years from the women's club. "Hi, Eleanor," she began, her voice a little too measured. "I saw something on Facebook this morning. From your daughter-in-law." I didn't respond. I don't want to assume anything, but it didn't sound like you. That's not how I know you to be." I exhaled. "Thank you, Ruth. I appreciate the call. But she wasn't the only one." 3 more messages came in over the next day and a half. Some subtle, others more pointed. "Was there really a scene at the party? I didn't think you were the type to throw tantrums. Brianna made it sound like you ruined everything on purpose." And still, I said nothing. Because I had learned something in the last few weeks. Silence, when used with intention, could speak louder than the most public of rebuttals. But I didn't stay idle. I called Thomas again. "Can you keep digging?" I asked. "I want to know if this was the first time they stole money or just the first time they got caught." He agreed without hesitation. 2 days later, he dropped off another folder on my doorstep. This one thinner than the last, but heavier in implication. Inside were records of small transfers. Multiple. Over the course of a year. All tied to Charles's accounts routed through the same shell company. "They've been siphoning," Thomas told me over the phone. "A little here, a little there. Not enough to flag automatically. But when you stack them together, it's substantial. How much? Nearly $200,000 total. I swallowed hard. They had been bleeding him slowly. Like parasites. I thought of Charles. Not a warm man, but not unkind. A businessman who still believed in handshakes and handwritten ledgers. He had trusted them. And they had betrayed that trust for the sake of appearances. A yacht, designer clothes, lavish dinners to show off their perfect life. I wrote an anonymous letter, printed copies of the documents, and mailed it to Charles. No return address, no signature. Just the truth laid bare. And then I waited. I didn't have to wait long. 3 days later, Linda came, knocking her expression tight. "Have you seen Facebook?" I shook my head. She held up her phone. Brianna's latest post read, "I guess being quiet doesn't mean being innocent." Below it, a blurry photo of me taken at my birthday party, mid-sentence, hand half raised. It was an unflattering freeze frame, clearly chosen for effect. "She's ramping it up," Linda muttered. "People are starting to whisper." "I know," I said. "Let them—" Linda looked at me carefully. "You're not going to defend yourself, I am," I said, my voice calm. "Just not on the internet." That night I received a call from Ruth again. Her tone was different this time, less hesitant, more certain. "I thought you should know." There was a scene at Charles's house today. I heard it from a friend who's close with the Langstons. Apparently he confronted Nathan and Brianna. They'd been summoned. I didn't say anything, just listened. They were caught off guard. Tried to spin it. But he had the paperwork. All of it. He demanded they pay everything back and said if they didn't, he'd cut them off. Entirely. I closed my eyes and nodded, even though she couldn't see me. "Thank you for telling me, Ruth." As I hung up, I felt a strange sense of stillness settle over me. I hadn't screamed. I hadn't pleaded. I hadn't argued online or fought in public. But justice had started to stir. I stepped out onto my porch and looked up at the stars. The night was quiet, cool, and clear. My breath came out slow and steady. Somewhere across town, I imagined Nathan and Brianna in a room filled with raised voices and pointing fingers. I imagined Charles slamming down a folder on a desk, red-faced, furious. I imagined their silence, their excuses, their unraveling. And I didn't feel glee. I didn't feel triumph. I felt relief. They had built their lives on illusion. And now the cracks were showing. Still, the comments on social media kept trickling in. Some friends stood by me. Others drifted, unsure what to believe. I didn't blame them. People love a scandal more than a story of quiet betrayal. But I had my allies. Linda, Thomas, even Ruth, who had asked questions but ultimately stayed loyal. That weekend at the farmer's market, Maria from the cafe waved me over. "Heard some nonsense going around," she said. "Just wanted you to know. I don't believe a word of it." "Thank you," I said. She smiled and handed me a lemon bar wrapped in wax paper. On the house. I walked through the rest of the market that morning feeling lighter, not because everything was fixed, but because something had shifted. They had tried to humiliate me publicly. I had answered privately. And now they were the ones unraveling, not with rage, but with truth. And truth, I was learning, had a weight all its own. A quiet weight, but unshakable. The door to Claire Mitchell's office closed with a soft but certain click behind me. The room smelled faintly of lemon polish and old books, and the morning sun streamed through the tall windows, casting long, pale lines across the hardwood floor. I took a slow breath as I stepped forward, my heels clicking gently against the polished wood. This building had once been a grand home before Claire converted it into her law practice. Now it held a quiet power, the kind I hadn't felt in a long time. Claire looked up from her desk, removing her glasses and smiling gently. "Eleanor, come on in." I sat in the worn leather chair across from her. The same chair where years ago I had signed over power of attorney to help Nathan secure his mortgage. Back then I'd been nervous but hopeful, trusting. This time was different. "I'd like to file," I said without preamble. Claire's eyebrows lifted. She nodded slowly and picked up her pen. "Defamation," she asked. "And financial misconduct," I added. She didn't look surprised. "I was wondering when you'd come in," she said. "You've been quiet but not absent." I nodded. "I wanted to be sure. Now I am." She slid a yellow legal pad across the desk. "Let's go over everything. Start with the social media posts." I told her about Brianna's public accusations, the photos, the sarcastic captions, the way they twisted what had happened at my birthday party. Then I gave her copies of the documents Thomas had uncovered, evidence of money transferred from Charles's accounts, the fake company, the forged signature. I had dated every page, labeled every section, just like I used to do with Nathan's school projects. Claire flipped through the papers in silence. Her pen scratched notes along the margins. At one point she looked up and asked, "Do you want to pursue this for damages?" I paused. "That depends. On if they stop, if they take the lies down, if they own up." She nodded, scribbling something down. "You're giving them an off-ramp." "For now," I said. "But I won't be slandered in public while they steal in private." It took us over 2 hours to outline the complaint. Claire was thorough. She asked sharp, clear questions. She walked me through the potential outcomes, the risks, and the timelines. When we finished, she looked me squarely in the eye. "This is going to stir things up, Eleanor. Once we file, it's public. The story will spread. Are you ready for that?" I let out a slow breath. I've been silent too long. And I've already been publicly humiliated, Claire. I might as well be humiliated on the record, with the truth on my side. She smiled, not with amusement, but with approval. "Then let's begin." The next morning, the legal filing was sent to the courthouse. By afternoon, a digital copy was circulating quietly among legal circles. That quiet didn't last long. By the end of the week, the town's online grapevine caught wind of it. First it was just whispers, then it turned into posts, then screenshots. Suddenly, the same people who had commented laughing emojis under Brianna's accusations were going silent, or deleting their comments altogether. I didn't post anything. I didn't issue a statement. I didn't text or call anyone to explain. I just kept living, kept showing up to the grocery store, the post office, the farmer's market. People looked. Some asked gentle questions, but most simply nodded with new understanding in their eyes. Linda stopped by one afternoon with a container of chili and a smirk on her face. "Well," she said, sitting on my porch swing beside me, "looks like your lawsuit made it into the town newsletter. Page 3 right between the lost cat and the new farmer's co-op hours." I laughed. "Page 3's respectable." We rocked in silence for a while, watching the clouds roll low over the hills. Then Linda added, "I heard Nathan's been suspended from work." I turned slowly toward her. "Suspended," she nodded. "My nephew works in HR at the firm. Said they launched an internal review the moment word of the investigation reached corporate." I folded my hands in my lap. He hadn't called. Not once. Not even after the documents had reached Charles. Not after the news broke. Not after the lawsuit was filed. He hadn't defended himself, and he hadn't apologized either. I wasn't sure which hurt more. Still, I didn't reach out. Instead, I met with Claire twice more that week. We refined the language of the complaint. She showed me how the posts violated clear defamation standards, how the financial misconduct documents backed a pattern of fraud. Her assistant helped gather official statements. Even Charles submitted a signed affidavit quietly but firmly confirming the stolen funds and their origin. One evening I sat by the fire with the case file on my lap, flipping through the documents as if they were chapters in a book I never wanted to write. But every line gave me back a little bit of power. These weren't just numbers. They were proof. Proof that I hadn't imagined the betrayal, that I wasn't overreacting, that I had in fact been right to feel hurt and right to respond. Across town, Brianna's social media went eerily quiet. The posts disappeared. Her carefully curated image began to crumble. People talked. Not cruelly, but curiously. Respectfully, even. As if they had finally allowed themselves to reconsider the version of events she had first presented. One afternoon at the grocery store, a woman I didn't know well approached me in the produce aisle. She looked nervous, her cart filled with apples and frozen dinners. I just wanted to say, she said softly, "I'm sorry. I liked one of her posts about you. I didn't know the whole story, but I do now." I blinked, surprised. "Thank you," I said. She smiled, embarrassed, and wheeled her cart away. But her words stayed with me. It wasn't vindication I felt. It was restoration. I wasn't trying to punish anyone. I just wanted my name back. At home, I opened my email and found a new message from Claire. The subject line was short. Filing. Confirmed. I clicked it open. The suit was officially in the court system. The clock had started. I leaned back in my chair and stared at the ceiling. The kitchen was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator and the tick of the old wall clock. I wasn't angry. I was steady. I was tired, yes. But more than anything, I was free. And no matter what came next, no matter how loud or messy or public, I knew I had done the right thing. For once, I hadn't shrunk. I had stood. And for that alone, I felt at peace. The ripple didn't take long to become a wave. At first, it was just the subtle silence, the absence of the usual comments on Brianna's curated posts, the likes that no longer trickled in, the friends who no longer tagged her in brunch photos or girls' night selfies. Then slowly the tone of the comments began to shift. At first polite, then probing, and finally pointed. I didn't seek them out. I didn't need to. The whispers came to me. At the bakery, Maria leaned over the counter and lowered her voice. "She's been posting again," she said, slipping my change into my palm. Tried to defend herself, but people aren't buying it this time. At the post office, Ellen tapped my shoulder and said, "Did you see that someone finally brought up the college tuition?" Said something like, "Didn't her mother-in-law pay for all that? Where's the respect?" It wasn't vengeance I felt. It wasn't even satisfaction. It was something quieter. A stillness that came from not needing to speak anymore because the truth was finally doing the talking for me. Claire had once warned me the public could be fickle. And she was right. But what no one tells you is that silence doesn't just echo. It shapes. And when you stand in it long enough with grace and patience, it becomes a mirror. People start seeing what they didn't want to before. Brianna's mask had cracked. Nathan's too. And the performance they had built, of generosity, of picture-perfect family life, was unraveling thread by thread. I was at home late one afternoon folding a basket of towels still warm from the dryer when I heard the doorbell. Through the window I saw her, Brianna. She stood on the porch in heels too tall for our uneven walkway, her coat too thin for the wind. Her arms were crossed tightly over her chest. The wind tugged at her carefully styled hair, lifting strands from her face. I didn't move right away. I just watched. She rang the bell again, then knocked. "Eleanor," she called loud enough to carry through the glass. "I just want to talk." I took a deep breath and walked to the door. I didn't open it. Instead, I stood behind it close enough for her to hear me through the wood. "You already said plenty," I said. I want to explain." I said nothing. "I know things got out of hand," she continued, her voice slipping into that polished cadence I'd heard so many times, the one she used when speaking at charity events, the one made to charm and deflect. I never meant for it to become public. "I didn't think you didn't think I'd fight back," I said, cutting through her carefully chosen words. A pause. I didn't think it would go this far. There it was. The truth tucked between the lines. It wasn't about remorse. It was about damage control. I rested my hand on the doorknob but didn't turn it. "You lied," I said, calm and even. You stole. You humiliated me. And when I finally stood up for myself, you tried to destroy my name to cover your own shame." Her voice cracked just slightly. "That's not fair." "No," I said. "What's not fair is that I gave everything I had, my time, my savings, my trust, and in return you gave me silence. You gave me ridicule. And when that didn't work, you gave me a smear campaign." Another pause. The sound of shifting feet. A long exhale. "I want to make this right." I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was empty. Her words felt like wrapping paper without a gift inside. "You don't want to make it right," I said. "You want to fix your image." A gust of wind blew across the porch, rattling the screen door slightly. "You used to call me Mom." I continued softer now. "You used to hug me at Thanksgiving. You used to sit beside me on the couch and show me photos of wedding dresses and ask what I thought." I paused and the ache in my chest rose. "I don't know where that girl went. But she's not the one standing on my porch now." Brianna said nothing. I placed my palm flat against the wood of the door. A gesture she couldn't see, but one that grounded me. "Tell Nathan I said the same." She shifted again and her voice came out colder. "So, that's it," I didn't answer. She turned. I heard the clicks of her heels fading down the steps, then the sound of her car door shutting. I waited until her engine started and drove off before I stepped away from the door. The towels were still waiting for me on the couch. I picked one up and folded it neatly, then another, and another. Later that evening, I walked to the mailbox. The sky had turned deep blue, and the first stars blinked awake above the rooftops. A neighbor waved. A child rode by on a scooter calling out to a friend. Life moved on. When I reached the porch again, I paused and looked out across the street. The house was quiet, peaceful. My peace. Earned, not given. Inside, I poured myself a cup of tea and sat by the window. My phone buzzed once. An unknown number. I didn't check it. Instead, I watched the steam rise from the cup and let the silence stretch. Not empty, but full. Brianna had come to reclaim her version of the story. But what she didn't understand, what she couldn't see, was that the story was no longer hers to shape. It belonged to the truth now. And the truth didn't need an audience. It simply needed to be lived. Quietly, steadily, one honest moment at a time. The morning the court filing became public, I was in my backyard watering the peonies. I hadn't intended to check the news. I'd promised myself that once the lawsuit was filed, I would let the process take its course. But Claire had sent a message the night before expect coverage by morning. "The docket is officially open." Sure enough, before I could even set the watering can down, Linda appeared at the side gate with a folded copy of the local paper in her hand and a knowing look in her eye. "You made page 1, she said, holding it up. I wiped my hands on a towel and took the paper. There it was, my name in bold print. Just under the headline about the school board elections. Local woman files suit against daughter-in-law and son. Alleging defamation. Financial misconduct. The article was short and professional, just the facts. It listed the dates, the allegations, the mention of Brianna's social media activity, and the financial evidence provided by Charles. No embellishment. No slant. Just the truth laid out in neat columns of ink. I read it twice. Not because I didn't believe it, but because it felt so surreal to see it all documented, out in the open. Linda patted my shoulder. "I know it's a lot," she said, "but I'm proud of you." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. That afternoon, the whispers started again. But this time, they sounded different. At the market, people glanced up from their carts and nodded respectfully. A man I barely knew from the hardware store tipped his hat as I passed. Ellen, from 2 blocks over, left a small card on my porch. Inside, she had written in her careful script, "You are a model of quiet strength. We see you. We admire you." I held that note in both hands for a long time. It was such a small gesture, but it settled over me like warmth. as if the world at last was offering back what had been taken for so long. The next day I got a call from Claire. "They've responded," she said. "But not with a countersuit." "Then what? Withdrawal of the public statements," she replied. And silence. Their attorney asked if you'd consider mediation instead of court. I didn't hesitate. No. Claire paused. "Are you sure they weren't silent when they humiliated me? They weren't quiet when they twisted the truth to suit their image?" "They don't get silence now. They get accountability." "Understood," she said. "I'll proceed." 2 days later, another storm broke. But this one didn't have my name on it. Nathan's company released a statement. Short-clipped, but powerful, after an internal audit discrepancies had been found in several project budgets, unauthorized transfers, misrepresented vendor payments. And Nathan's name was at the center of it all. He was terminated that same day. Not with a severance, not with a farewell, just an announcement to the staff, and a security escort out the front door. I didn't gloat. I didn't celebrate. I just sat on my porch swing that evening with a cup of tea watching the clouds roll over the hills. There was something strangely stilling about the way consequences eventually find their way back to those who think they're untouchable. The news spread quickly. Brianna's real estate license was quietly suspended pending a review of ethical complaints. Some of her former clients spoke out about deals that felt rushed contracts they didn't fully understand. The cracks had been there all along. People were only now looking closely enough to see them. Their names disappeared from the charity gala invitations. The club memberships were canceled. One by one, their glossy affiliations faded like dust in the wind. And just like that, they left town. No farewell party. No send-off. Just a moving van in the driveway on a Thursday morning and a for sale sign planted in the front lawn before noon. I didn't watch them pack. I didn't need to. But Linda told me later that Brianna kept her sunglasses on the whole time and Nathan never once looked toward my house. I think he knew. What hurt most wasn't that they left. It was that after everything he never knocked on my door to say goodbye. Not a word. Not a note. Not even a quiet moment of acknowledgement. Just distance. Permanent. Inevitable. But even that couldn't undo what I had gained. After they were gone, the neighborhood felt lighter. A strange kind of spring cleaning. The air warmer, the energy softer. People waved more easily. Conversations flowed more gently. One evening, as I watered the flower beds near my porch, a little girl walked past with her grandmother. She pointed at my house and whispered something. The grandmother smiled and waved. "You're the lady who stood up," she said. I smiled back. "I guess I am." That night I pulled out the letter Ellen had written and placed it on the mantel. Not because I needed the validation, but because it reminded me that quiet courage leaves traces. A few days later, another envelope arrived in the mail. No return address, but the handwriting was familiar. Inside was a small handwritten note from Charles. "Thank you," it said simply. "I see clearly now. There was no need for more. That weekend I baked a peach cobbler. Just like I used to. Linda came over with fresh cream and we ate together on the porch, watching the sun set over the hills. I hope you know," she said as she wiped her spoon clean, "this whole town has learned something from you." I looked down at my hands, wrinkled but steady. "I didn't set out to teach anyone," I said softly. "I just wanted to stop disappearing." "Well," she smiled, "you did both." And for the first time in a long, long while, I believed her. The morning I left for Maine, the sky was the color of faded denim, and the air carried that early spring stillness, the kind where everything feels like it's just about to change. I stood on my front porch for a long while, keys in hand, looking out over the lawn, the garden beds, the sidewalk where I had watched children grow up and leaves fall year after year. My bags were already packed. 2 suitcases, 1 small cooler, a box of books, and a journal that still had more blank pages than filled ones. Everything else I needed was already waiting for me at the cabin. I hadn't told many people where I was going, Just Linda and my neighbor Pete, who had offered to keep an eye on the mail. Linda arrived just after sunrise holding 2 coffees and wearing her old denim jacket. She didn't knock. She never needed to. She just walked through the gate and stood beside me on the porch quiet for a moment before speaking. "You sure about this?" she asked. I nodded. "It's not forever," I said. "Just long enough." She didn't ask what that meant. She didn't need to. We stood shoulder to shoulder as the town slowly stirred around us. The familiar squeak of Mr. Harris's screen door down the street. The sound of Ellen's terrier barking at the wind. The paperboy's bicycle gears clicking with every turn. "I'm proud of you, you know," Linda said after a while. "Not for what you did to them, for what you did for yourself." I smiled, tears stinging at the corners of my eyes. She stepped closer and wrapped her arms around me. It wasn't a quick hug. It was one of those rare embraces that didn't rush to end, that said all the things words sometimes fail to carry. When she pulled back, she looked me straight in the eyes. "You don't need to beat them, Eleanor. You just needed to stop losing yourself." Then she added softer, "You already won." I placed the coffee on the dashboard of my car, climbed in and rolled the window down. "I'll call you once I get there," I said. "You better," she replied, forcing a smile that barely held back the tears. I started the engine. The car rumbled like it always did, a low, dependable sound that felt like home. As I pulled away from the curb, I caught Linda's wave in the rearview mirror. Then the houses blurred past. The town I had spent my entire life in grew smaller in the glass until it became just rooftops and trees. And memory. It was a long drive to the coast. The roads grew quieter the farther I went, trading suburban intersections for winding highways and wooded stretches of 2-lane roads lined with pine. I stopped once at a gas station off Route 1, bought a pack of almonds and a map I didn't really need, just for the nostalgia of unfolding it and tracing my finger along the route. As the sun dipped lower, I rolled down the windows and let the salty breeze blow through the car. The scent of the sea hit me long before I saw it. Clean and vast and humbling. That scent alone was enough to make me inhale deeper than I had in weeks. The cabin was exactly as the photos had shown. Small, weathered with a porch that faced the ocean, and shutters that had long ago lost their fresh paint, but none of their charm. I parked the car, cut the engine, and stepped out into the silence. There was no one around for miles, just the sound of gulls overhead and waves breaking in slow, steady rhythm. I carried my bags inside one by one. The cabin smelled of cedar and sea air. Simple linens, creaky floorboards, a rocking chair near the fireplace. There was no television, no phone, just a landline for emergencies and a small bookshelf filled with worn paperbacks and a couple of forgotten puzzles. I stood in the center of the room, letting the stillness settle into me. I didn't feel lonely. I felt spacious. I unpacked slowly, methodically, placing my clothes in the pinewood drawers, stacking books by the nightstand. I tucked the journal into the top drawer, knowing I would reach for it soon. By the time I finished, the sun had begun to set. I stepped out onto the porch with a blanket draped around my shoulders and sat in the rocking chair that faced the water. The horizon stretched wide and pink, the last of the daylight folding itself into the waves. I rocked, gently sipping tea from the mug I'd brought with me. The porch creaked with every shift of weight, a sound that felt as old and steady as my heartbeat. And there, in the hush of the evening, I let it all go. The court filings, the cold stares, the public smears, the silence from Nathan, the betrayal I had carried like a stone in my chest. I let it all float out toward the tide, because I had carried enough. I watched as a heron moved along the shoreline, slow and deliberate. I listened to the rhythm of the ocean, each wave saying, "You're still here." Somewhere back in town, the world went on. People had dinner. Traffic lights blinked from red to green. Phones buzzed. Screens refreshed. But here there was no performance. Just me. And that was enough. A few hours later, I lit the fireplace with the matches left on the mantel. The flames crackled to life, licking at the logs with warmth and light. I curled up on the couch with an old quilt and opened my journal. The first line I wrote was, "This. I have lived long enough to know that love does not mean silence, that kindness does not mean surrender, and that family, if not grounded in respect, is just performance." I paused, then added, "Love should not be measured in sacrifice alone. It should be mutual, seen, safe." I closed the book, letting the pages rest beside me. Outside, the wind picked up. The sea whispered things I couldn't quite hear, but I understood them anyway. I wasn't broken. I wasn't forgotten. I wasn't small. I was a woman who had given and learned and stood back up. I reached for my tea and leaned back against the pillows, the fire warming my feet, the ocean just beyond the glass. And in that quiet cabin, wrapped in the hush of salt air and new beginnings, I finally understood something I had never dared say aloud. I had spent my whole life loving others. Now it was time to love myself too. Not in grand gestures, but in quiet, steady peace. And that was more than enough. Have you ever felt like the people you gave the most to ended up giving you the least in return? If Eleanor's journey resonated with you, the quiet strength, the heartbreak, the courage to take her power back, you're not alone. So many of us carry invisible scars from family we loved too deeply and boundaries we set too late. If you've ever had to choose peace over being accepted, if you've ever learned to love yourself after being forgotten, this story is for you. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Share your story in the comments below. And if you want to hear more true-to-life stories of strength, betrayal, and quiet redemption, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and hit the bell so you never miss what comes next. Your voice matters, and you are never alone.